Man sprays a royal guard. What happened next left everyone in total disbelief. James Miller had always been a man who lived for adventure. Not the dangerous kind, but the kind that made people laugh, smile, or simply shake their heads in disbelief. Ever since he started his video channel, James had made it his mission to travel the world and capture moments that were light-hearted and surprising. His goal wasn't to upset anyone. He just liked making people laugh. He believed the world needed more fun, and he wanted to be the person who gave it to them. That summer, James decided to visit one of the most iconic places in the world, London. With its double-decker buses, red phone booths, and rainy skies, the city had always fascinated him. But more than anything else, he was drawn to the one thing every tourist talks about, the royal guards outside Buckingham Palace. He had seen them in movies and documentaries, tall, serious men dressed in bright red uniforms and black bearskin hats. They stood completely still, like statues, not moving even when people shouted jokes or waved hands in front of their faces. They were known for their discipline, for being so focused that nothing could make them laugh or even blink. To James, they were both mysterious and impressive. On his second day in London, James woke up early, charged his camera batteries, and checked his list of filming ideas. Buckingham Palace was at the top. He was staying at a small hotel not too far from the palace, and after a quick breakfast, he grabbed his backpack and set off. The weather was surprisingly pleasant, blue skies with just a few fluffy clouds drifting lazily above. A light breeze moved through the streets, and people were out walking, laughing, and sipping coffee from paper cups. As James made his way toward the palace, he passed through Green Park, where tourists relaxed on benches and children played near the fountains. He smiled, thinking how different this place felt from his hometown in Ohio. Everything here felt more polished, more proper, but that just made him more excited. London had a kind of magic he couldn't describe. When he finally reached the gates of Buckingham Palace, a large crowd had already gathered. People from all over the world stood with cameras in hand, waiting for a glimpse of the changing of the guard. James could hear several languages being spoken around him, French, Spanish, Japanese, and it reminded him just how special this place was. Everyone had come for the same reason, to witness a tradition that had been going on for hundreds of years. He found a spot near the front and set up his camera. He wasn't live streaming today. He wanted to capture the moment and edit it later. His plan wasn't anything wild. He just thought he might ask the guard a funny question or maybe hold a sign that said something silly. Just something light. He had seen videos online where people danced nearby or tried to make the guards smile, but they never succeeded. The guards were trained to ignore everything. James wanted to see it for himself, not to disturb them, but to experience the moment. While he waited, he looked around. A few other tourists were doing similar things, taking selfies with the guards in the background, recording short clips, even trying to guess which guard might blink first. Everyone was having fun, but also being respectful. James reminded himself that even though the guards looked like part of a show, they were actually real soldiers. That fact added a layer of seriousness that even he didn't want to ignore. Still, James couldn't help but feel curious. What would happen if someone really managed to get a reaction? He didn't want to cross the line, but he thought maybe, just maybe, he could do something a little playful, like offer a harmless joke or wave in a funny way. As the sun rose higher, the guards began their slow march. Their boots clicked against the ground in perfect rhythm. Every movement was sharp, precise, and filled with purpose. James watched, fascinated by their control. He zoomed in on his camera to catch every detail, the shine of the buttons, the firmness in their jawlines, the perfect balance of their tall hats. Just then, James felt a bit hot. The London sun, though mild by local standards, was stronger than he expected. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small spray bottle he always carried with him while traveling. It was filled with cool water, meant to refresh his face when the heat got too strong. He gave himself a quick spray, enjoying the light mist on his cheeks and forehead. A little girl nearby pointed and giggled. "Look, Mommy, he's spraying himself like a plant." James laughed too and gave her a friendly wave. Then, without really thinking it through, he turned slightly toward the guard nearest to him. The guard hadn't moved an inch. The sun was shining right on the guard's face, and James thought, man, he must be roasting in that uniform. It was just a thought, a harmless one. But then another idea popped into his mind, something unexpected. What if he gave the guard a tiny mist of cool water? He knew it sounded silly. He didn't want to be rude. He even told himself it would just be a tiny spray, barely noticeable. Maybe the guard wouldn't even feel it. He looked around. People were talking, laughing, and taking photos. Nobody seemed to notice what he was doing. So with a grin, James raised the spray bottle slightly and gave a short burst of mist, not directly on the guard, but just near his side. The spray barely traveled a few feet before vanishing into the warm air. He immediately looked back at the guard. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the unexpected began to unfold. The guard's head moved just slightly. His eyes seemed to flicker. The crowd around James went quiet as if someone had pressed a mute button. James could feel the shift in energy even if he wasn't sure what had caused it. Had the guard just reacted? Had James done something wrong? He quickly lowered the spray bottle and stepped back, heart suddenly beating faster. The playful feeling was gone. In its place was a growing sense of concern. He hadn't meant to do anything disrespectful. It had all been part of the fun, or so he thought, but the people near him had seen it. A few were whispering. One man gave him a look that was hard to read, part curiosity, part disapproval. James realized that even a small act could be taken seriously in a place like this. It wasn't just about having fun anymore. It was about understanding the space he was in and the history behind it. He looked at the guard again. The man was back in position, standing straight, unmoving, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. James knew it. And so did the crowd. That moment, so brief and quiet, would soon become the center of something much bigger. James just didn't know it yet. For now, he packed up his camera, gave a quiet nod to the guard, and began walking away. The spray bottle was still cold in his hand, but his thoughts were racing. He wasn't sure if he had crossed the line or simply danced near it. All he knew was that he would remember that moment for a long time. What happened next, he could never have imagined. James couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. As he walked away from Buckingham Palace, weaving through the crowd of tourists and city-goers, he kept looking back, half expecting something more to happen and half hoping it wouldn't. The spray bottle was now tucked away in his bag, but the moment still played in his mind like a short, silent movie. Had the guard really moved? Was that tiny head movement enough to be called a reaction? And more importantly, did anyone officially see it? He didn't know. But what he did know was that something had changed. There had been a spark, a shift in the air, and even though it was small, it was unforgettable. James took a turn down a quiet street, hoping to clear his thoughts. The city was still buzzing, filled with honking cars, chatting crowds, and the occasional siren in the distance. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. Back in his hotel room later that day, James transferred the footage from his camera to his laptop. He didn't plan to post anything yet, at least not until he reviewed it carefully. He opened the video, fast-forwarded to the part where he stood near the guard, and watched it frame by frame. There it was, the spray, a split-second reaction, a blink, a flinch, maybe just a shadow. James leaned in close, studying the video like a detective. It wasn't very clear, but to him the reaction was real. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting or sudden movements. But there was definitely something. A change in posture, the eyes tightening, the jawline shifting just slightly. To most people it would seem like nothing. To James it meant everything. But this wasn't the kind of clip he could just throw online with a funny title and expect applause. He knew this could stir different emotions. Some people might laugh, others might criticize him. What if people thought he had been disrespectful? What if the guard got into trouble because of this? The weight of those thoughts made him pause. He closed his laptop and stared at the ceiling. This had started as just another travel video, a harmless day of fun and filming, but now it felt more serious, more complicated. And he wasn't sure what to do next. That night, James took a walk along the River Thames. The cool air helped clear his mind. The city looked beautiful, lights from the buildings reflected off the water, and the London Eye slowly turned in the distance. People walked by in groups, couples held hands, and children laughed as they chased pigeons near the bridges. James thought about his channel, about his audience. They had followed him for years because he was fun, spontaneous, and different. He had done silly challenges in New York, filmed street food adventures in Bangkok, and even tried goat yoga in Canada once. But never before had he found himself in a situation that felt this, complicated. He wasn't proud or smug about what had happened. He wasn't even sure if he was in the wrong. But he was starting to realize something. Even small actions can carry big meanings, especially in places full of history and tradition. The next morning, James made a decision. Before posting anything, he wanted to understand more. He started researching the royal guards, not just what tourists knew, but the real story behind them. He learned that the guards were not actors or performers. They were real soldiers, part of the British Army. Their job wasn't just to stand still, it was to protect the royal family and important buildings. Standing guard was only one part of their duty. Behind the uniforms were people who had trained, served, and in some cases even gone to war. James was surprised. He had always seen them as part of the London show. The red coats, the tall hats, the silent discipline, it all felt like a living postcard. But now, reading deeper, he understood how serious their role really was. They weren't just standing there for photos. They were standing there for purpose. This new understanding made James reflect on his actions even more. He hadn't meant to be rude. He hadn't meant to challenge the guards' discipline. But in a way, he had treated the moment too lightly. And now, he wasn't sure how to feel. Later that afternoon, James decided to return to the palace. Not with a camera this time, not with a plan, just to observe, to think. He stood among the crowd again, this time with a different mindset. He watched the guards carefully, the way they moved, the way they stood. He listened to the comments around him. Some tourists were giggling, some whispering, others making jokes. But James didn't laugh. Now that he knew more, everything looked different. He spotted the same guard from yesterday, or at least he thought it was him. The same strong build, the same steady stance. James felt a mix of guilt and respect. He wanted to say something, maybe even apologize, but he knew the guards couldn't respond, and maybe it wasn't even the same one. Still, he stood there for a long time, just watching. As the sun dipped behind the palace, James took a quiet breath and walked away. The moment had passed, but its impact hadn't. Back in his room, he made a note in his travel journal. Sometimes, a small action can carry more weight than you realize. What begins as fun can teach you something important, if you're willing to see it. He still hadn't posted the video, and at that point he wasn't even sure if he would. But something else happened later that week. Something that would take this quiet, personal moment and turn it into something the whole world would see. It started when someone else in the crowd, a man James hadn't even noticed, posted a short clip on social media. The clip showed James, spray bottle in hand, misting the air near the guard. It was only a few seconds long, but it caught the exact moment the guard moved slightly and looked in James's direction. The caption read, "Just watch." By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Thousands of people shared it. Some thought it was funny. Others were angry. Many asked, "Who is this guy?" James didn't even know the video had been posted until he started getting messages, some from friends, some from strangers. His inbox was full. His name was trending on social media. Comments ranged from playful teasing to serious criticism. He was suddenly at the center of a conversation he hadn't planned, and now he had to decide what to do next. Would he defend himself? Would he stay silent? Would he explain what really happened? The world was watching. And the story that began with a quiet mist in the air was about to grow bigger than James had ever imagined. James woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, he thought it was just another travel notification or maybe a message from one of his friends back home. But as he turned on the screen, his eyes widened. Dozens of unread messages, emails, app alerts. His social media accounts had exploded overnight. He sat up quickly, his heart beating faster with each notification he read. "Hey man, is this really you in the Royal Guard video?" "James, you're trending. What happened at Buckingham Palace?" He clicked on a link a friend had sent. It opened a short video clip, already with over 2 million views. It was him. There he was in the middle of the crowd at Buckingham Palace, holding the spray bottle. The camera angle was from the side. It hadn't been his own footage, but someone else's, taken from a different point of view. It showed the exact moment he lightly misted the air near the guard, followed by the slight movement from the guard that had surprised everyone. The video ended with a few seconds of shocked silence from the crowd. The caption read, "He had come to London to film fun travel content, not to become part of a global trending story. Yet here he was, the main character in a viral video that people all over the world were sharing, commenting on, and reacting to." He clicked on the comments. Some were lighthearted. "That guard blinked, that never happens. This guy is lucky he didn't get in serious trouble." Others were more serious, disrespectful. The guards are not part of a circus. He should apologize. This isn't a joke. And then some people were simply confused. Did he spray the guard, or was it an accident? James leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He knew this moment would come eventually. The moment where something small snowballs into something bigger than expected, but he had never imagined it would happen this way. He opened his laptop and watched the video again, this time comparing it to his own footage. His video was longer, clearer. It showed the full story, not just the moment of the spray, but the seconds before and after. It showed him spraying himself first, joking with a child in the crowd, and then misting the air near the guard, not directly on him, but near him. It also showed his reaction, the instant concern on his face, the way he stepped back, and the quiet way he left the area. That part had been left out of the viral clip. James realized something important. People were reacting to what they thought happened, not what really happened. And while he didn't blame anyone for jumping to conclusions, he knew he couldn't just sit back and watch. He needed to say something. He opened his camera and took a deep breath. "Hey everyone," he began, his voice calm but serious. "It's James. I know many of you have seen the video that's going around. Yes, that's me, and I want to tell you the full story." He explained everything. How the day had started, why he was at Buckingham Palace, how he had used the spray bottle on himself first because of the heat, and how he had never intended to be disrespectful. He told his viewers about how he had researched the guards afterward, how he had gone back to the palace just to observe, and how the experience had changed the way he thought about his actions. "I didn't go there to cause trouble," he said, looking into the lens. "I went to learn, to explore, and yes, to have fun. But I've learned that sometimes even something small can be misunderstood, and I take responsibility for that." He ended the video with a simple line. "I respect the guards, I respect the traditions. And if my action gave the wrong impression, I truly apologize." He uploaded the video. Then he waited. At first, there was silence. No major reaction, just a few views, some kind words from loyal followers. But within a few hours, the response began to build. People started commenting. "Thanks for explaining. That makes more sense now. I appreciate your honesty, respect. We all make mistakes. It's how you handle them that matters." Even some of the more critical voices from earlier began to soften. When people watched the full version of events, they saw a different side of the story, a more complete one, and many respected James for coming forward not with excuses but with a calm explanation. Later that day, a popular news blog picked up his response video, then another. And soon the conversation started to shift. James wasn't just the guy who sprayed the royal guard anymore. He became the guy who owned up to it, explained it, and showed respect. A few days later, James received an unexpected email. It was from a man named Oliver, a retired royal guard who now ran a small museum and education center dedicated to British military traditions. The message read, "Hi James, I saw your video. I think you handled a tricky situation with maturity. If you're still in London, I'd love to invite you for a cup of tea and a chat. I think there's more to learn here on both sides." James was touched. He hadn't expected that. The next day, he took the train to a quiet area just outside the city where the former guard lived. Oliver greeted him warmly. He was tall, with a kind face and eyes that had clearly seen a lot of the world. Over tea and biscuits, they talked for hours. Oliver explained the training guards go through. The early mornings, the physical discipline, the mental focus. He shared stories of standing through rain, heat, and even snow, without moving, without reacting, all while tourists surrounded them with cameras, jokes, and distractions. "It's not that we don't feel anything," Oliver said. "It's that we're trained to hold it in, to focus. It's a symbol of loyalty, of strength, but we're still human." James listened, taking it all in. He asked questions, wrote down notes, and even filmed a short interview with Oliver, with his permission, of course. The final clip, titled "What I Learned from a Royal Guard," became one of James's most viewed videos ever. But more importantly, it became one of his most meaningful ones. He didn't just film for clicks anymore. He filmed to understand. Back in his hotel room, James looked out the window at the London skyline. The city looked the same, but he felt different. He came here expecting to capture a few fun moments, maybe try some fish and chips, visit a museum, and call it a trip. But what he got was a lesson. A real one, a lesson in respect, in awareness, and in how the world sees you, even when you don't realize they're watching. As he packed his bags ready to head to his next destination, he smiled. Not because of the views or the fame, but because he had grown, just a little. And sometimes a little growth is more valuable than a million views. James returned home from London with a head full of thoughts and a heart a little heavier than before. Not in a sad way, but in a wiser way. He had left for a fun travel adventure, but he had returned with something far more valuable than souvenirs or photographs. He came back with a life lesson. The internet was still buzzing. His video with Oliver, the retired royal guard, had touched many people. Thousands of comments poured in from around the world, some from people who had never even heard of the royal guards before, others from those who had family members in the military. The tone had changed. The angry comments were now rare. Most people were simply thankful. One comment stood out to James. It read, "You made a mistake, but you turned it into a moment of learning. That takes courage. Thank you for showing us that it's okay to grow." That message stayed with him. Back in Ohio, James found himself rethinking his approach to his videos. For years, he had been focused on excitement, jokes, surprises, and reactions. But now, he wanted to create stories that also made people think. He didn't want to lose his playful spirit, but he realized he could be fun and respectful at the same time. He decided to take a short break from posting, not because he was hiding, but because he wanted to plan things right. He wanted his next videos to reflect the change he had gone through. During this break, James was invited to speak on a podcast hosted by two friendly travel vloggers. They had followed his journey from the beginning and wanted to hear the full story in his own words. The podcast episode was titled, "More Than a Moment, The James Miller Story." During the chat, one of the hosts asked, "Looking back, do you regret what happened?" James paused for a moment and then said, "I don't regret being there or filming or wanting to share my experiences. What I do regret is not understanding enough before I acted." That's the real lesson. It wasn't a bad intention, but it was a moment that taught me how important awareness is, especially when you're in someone else's culture, someone else's history. The episode became one of their most listened to of the year. People were drawn to James's honesty. He didn't try to make excuses. He didn't blame anyone. He simply told the truth. And the truth was this: we all have blind spots, but we can learn from them if we're open to it. 1 week after the podcast aired, James got another unexpected message, this time from a university in the United States. A professor of media studies had watched his video and invited James to speak in front of a group of students studying social media, storytelling, and digital responsibility. James felt both honored and nervous. He had never spoken in front of a classroom before, especially not as a case study, but he accepted the invitation. When the day came, James stood at the front of the small lecture hall, holding a remote in one hand and a nervous smile on his face. "Hi, everyone," he began. "My name is James Miller, and I'm the guy who accidentally went viral for almost making a royal guard blink." The students laughed, and the tension in the room faded. James then shared the whole journey, what he had planned, what actually happened, how the internet reacted, and most importantly, how he had changed. He talked about responsibility, context, and respect in the digital age. "Being behind the camera doesn't mean we're invisible," he said. "What we do still matters. Even if our intentions are good, the way our actions are received can be very different. That's why understanding matters." After his talk, many students came up to thank him. One student who had just started her own small travel blog said, "I never thought about how a small moment could mean something bigger. I'll remember this." James left the university that day with a new kind of joy. It wasn't the excitement of a big view count or a trending video. It was the quiet pride of knowing he had helped someone else learn something important just by sharing his own experience. As weeks passed, James started planning his next trip. He still wanted to explore the world, but now he wanted to dive deeper into the places he visited. Not just the surface-level fun, but the heart of each culture. He wanted to meet locals, learn their customs, and understand their traditions before pressing record. He began a new series on his channel called Stories Behind the Scenes. The first episode was filmed at a small tea farm in Japan, where James learned the art of tea making from a kind, elderly couple who had been growing tea leaves for 40 years. He wore traditional clothes, participated in a quiet tea ceremony, and listened carefully to their stories. The video was peaceful, thoughtful, and beautifully filmed. It didn't rely on surprises or tricks. It simply showed respect, learning, and connection, and people loved it. Comments flooded in again. "This is your best video yet. I never knew about tea farming in Japan. Thank you for showing us. This feels like the kind of content the world needs more of." James smiled as he read the messages. He didn't feel like he had fixed everything because this wasn't about fixing. It was about growing. And growth is a journey, not a finish line, but not everyone had forgotten the Royal Guard moment. One morning, as James checked his inbox, he saw a message with the subject, "An invitation from London." His heart skipped. The message was from the British Heritage Society, an organization that promoted education and understanding of British culture. They had seen how James had turned a brief mistake into a learning opportunity, and they wanted to invite him back to attend a special behind-the-scenes tour of the Royal Guard training grounds. James was speechless. They weren't inviting him to scold him. They were inviting him to learn more. It was a chance to see how the guards train, to understand their routines, their responsibilities, and what it means to represent centuries of tradition. It was an opportunity not usually offered to the public, let alone someone who had once become a controversial figure among them. James replied with deep gratitude. When he returned to London a few weeks later, he was met by a guide named Captain Reynolds, a thoughtful man in his early 40s with a quiet sense of humor and a clear passion for his work. They toured the grounds, saw the soldiers training, watched as they practiced standing still for long periods under the sun, wind, and even rain. "They're not just standing," Captain Reynolds explained. "They're representing. And that takes more strength than most people realize." James nodded, remembering the day he stood in front of the guard with a water bottle in his hand. That moment felt like a lifetime ago. At the end of the tour, Captain Reynolds said something that stayed with James. "Mistakes happen, but not everyone chooses to turn them into lessons. You did, and that's what made all the difference." James thanked him and left the grounds feeling honored, humbled, and deeply reflective. He knew now that this story was no longer just about a video. It was about growth, about learning to listen, about understanding the world not just through a lens, but through the eyes of the people in it. James would go on to travel to more countries, tell more stories, and meet more people. But this chapter, his unexpected journey from a playful tourist to a thoughtful storyteller, would always remain close to his heart. Because sometimes, the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes. Months had passed since James Miller had first become known as the man with the spray bottle. But now, the world saw him differently. Not just as a traveler or a video creator, but as someone who had grown through an unexpected experience. His journey had been shared by newspapers, websites, and podcasts. What began as a quick moment in front of Buckingham Palace had slowly turned into a conversation about respect, responsibility, and the power of learning from mistakes. Back in his hometown in Ohio, James finally had time to reflect. He had been traveling non-stop ever since his return from London, filming new episodes for his Stories Behind the Scenes series. He had visited local villages in India, joined a lantern-making workshop in Vietnam, and even spent a few days with a beekeeper in Italy learning how honey is made. These stories were quieter than his earlier videos. Less focused on getting a laugh, more focused on real people and their lives. And strangely, they were more successful than anything he had done before. One evening, James sat in his favorite coffee shop, a cozy little place near the river where he often went to write. A soft rain was tapping against the window, and the scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air. He opened his laptop not to edit a video this time, but to write something different, something personal. He titled it, "What I Learned from a Mistake." In it, he wrote about the moment at Buckingham Palace, not just what happened, but how it felt, what came after, and how it changed the direction of his work. He talked about the pressure of online attention, the weight of judgment, and the importance of owning up to your actions. He wrote not as a YouTuber trying to explain himself, but as a person trying to connect. He ended the piece with a short paragraph that read, "We all have moments we wish we could take back, but sometimes those moments give us something greater than we expected. Not shame. Not failure, but understanding, and that understanding can change the way we see the world and ourselves." He posted the article on his blog and shared it quietly with his followers. No big announcement, no clickbait title, just a simple, honest message. Within a day, the post was shared thousands of times. Teachers used it in classrooms. Bloggers wrote about it. One reader even sent James a message saying, "Your words helped me forgive myself for something I've held on to for years. Thank you." It was then James truly understood something powerful. People didn't always want perfection. They wanted honesty. They wanted stories that felt real. And his story, as unusual as it was, had become just that. A few weeks later, James was invited to speak at an international digital media conference. It was held in Amsterdam and brought together creators, educators, and storytellers from around the world. James was asked to give a talk on the topic of responsibility in the age of online influence. As he stood on the stage in front of hundreds of people, he felt calm, not because he had done this before, but because he knew what he was saying mattered. He spoke from the heart, sharing everything: how he just wanted to film something fun, how a small decision led to something bigger, and how facing it with honesty had changed his path. He showed a short video clip from the moment with the Royal Guard, then followed it with clips from the tea farm in Japan and the lantern workshop in Vietnam. "These videos may look very different," he said, "but they're connected by one important thing: understanding. Once I started seeing the people and stories behind the traditions, I realized how much richer the world becomes." The crowd clapped warmly. After his talk, several other creators came to speak with him, asking questions, sharing their own stories, and thanking him for being real. Later that night, James stood by a canal in Amsterdam, watching the lights reflect on the water. A soft breeze passed and the city felt alive. He smiled to himself, remembering how nervous he had once felt after that first video went viral. It felt like another lifetime. Back home, James continued creating content. But now he was also invited to schools, colleges, and workshops. People wanted to hear his story, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. It had a royal seal on the envelope. James opened it slowly, unsure what it could be. Inside was a formal invitation from the royal household of the United Kingdom. The letter thanked him for how he had handled the incident, acknowledged the impact of his follow-up videos, and invited him to a formal event celebrating cultural understanding and global exchange. James was shocked. He had never expected anything like this. To be invited not as a warning or punishment, but as a guest, because of how he responded, not what he had done. A few weeks later, dressed in his best suit, James stood among guests from different countries at the event in London. The atmosphere was respectful but warm. People shared stories, exchanged ideas, and celebrated how culture connects people in unexpected ways. At one point, he found himself speaking with a young guard in training. The young man said, "We saw the video in class, the full version. Our instructor used it as an example, not of what not to do, but of how someone can grow from it. Just thought you should know." James felt his heart swell. That meant more to him than anything. As the evening ended, he stood outside the venue looking at the city lights just as he had done during his first visit to London. But now, everything was different. He had come full circle. His journey had started with a single action, spraying mist on a warm day. A small moment, one that could have faded and been forgotten. But because he chose to face it, learn from it, and grow through it, that moment became a story. A story that reminded people it's okay to make mistakes, as long as we learn, listen, and keep moving forward with respect. That night, James posted one last video about the Royal Guard story, a final chapter. He titled it, "The Full Journey." It wasn't about getting views anymore. It was about completing the story, not just for his followers, but for himself. In the video, he said, "I started this story thinking I was just filming a fun moment. I didn't know I was walking into something deeper. I've learned that every culture has layers, every tradition has meaning, and every person we meet has a story. All we have to do is pay attention. And if we mess up along the way, that's okay. What matters most is what we do next." The video ended with a photo of him and Oliver, the retired royal guard, standing side by side, smiling. That image said everything. James went on to create more stories, travel to more places, and meet more people. But he never forgot the moment that changed everything. And neither did the world. Because sometimes, the story that begins with a single mistake ends with a lesson that helps others far beyond what you ever expected.